Right, well, I'm Kath Harrison, and joining me shortly is Andy from Weekly 10, who will be focusing on the future for employee engagement. And I know he's got some wonderful tips and advice to share with us, so looking forward to that. Throughout the webinar, please do comment in the chat section with your questions, and we'll endeavour to answer them either as we go or towards the end of the session. Now, for those who don't know me or are not familiar with JVP Group, in brief, we help employers across the UK to attract the best people through online job advertising with employer brand marketing. Now, we work with HR professionals, business owners and hiring managers, and we remove all the hassle and the high cost from the recruitment process. We do it through a range of bespoke services with regards to advertising, marketing and providing time-saving support. Now, the recent news that we've been shortlisted for an award for Workplace Design of the Year has been a bit of a teaser for us this week, as the JVP team and I are usually based in our offices in St Asaph in North Wales, and we hope to get back there very soon. Working from home is okay. It certainly has its advantages for some, but for a JVP, we really do miss the vibrant team atmosphere and the spacious desks. I don't know if anybody else is feeling the same with that, or actually you'd rather stay working from home more long term. And for those of you that do have children, hopefully you'll relate to the fact that it's been quite a challenging time trying to juggle the work with a 5-year-old running around the house and trying to juggle homeschooling. Obviously it brings a whole new challenge. So that might be why I look another 10 years older in only 3 months. Anyway, let's get to it. So we're going to be talking about, first of all, the changing job market. For the last few years, with unemployment levels at record lows, we've been operating in a candidate-driven market. Put simply, this has meant that high-caliber candidates were often receiving multiple job offers, as well as their current employers trying to offer more to keep them as their employee. But there's of course no hiding from the fact that the significant impact of the pandemic is having a huge impact on businesses, in turn on it's having a big impact on employment levels, is the words I'm trying to get out. Sadly, for those without work, the numbers are increasing and expected to do so more over the coming months as furlough comes to an end. For most industries, the impact of COVID-19 has seen the impact of the job market become saturated with candidates, flipping the candidates-driven market on its back as we now enter an employer-driven market. So in an employer-driven market, it's the companies usually that call the shots, and typically employees will hire at their own pace, can focus wholly on their needs, and face little or no competition from peers in the industry. Though I will come back to the pitfalls of this approach a little later. There are many high caliber people seeking employment right now, and for those companies who are able to, recruiting right now may bring many dividends. So if you have the finances and the opportunities to do so, now isn't the time to abandon all your hard work on the culture, the employer brand and your reputation. It's a perfect opportunity to find great people with a depth of experience and drive who can fully fulfill your roles. So we're going to have a look at some of the challenges of this new employer-driven market. I mean, when the next need arises to recruit, having more candidates to choose from sounds like good news, surely. If you're taking this time to review your recruitment strategy for the future, be mindful though that the next time you need to recruit, you're likely to have completely different recruitment challenges than before the pandemic. The first challenge is likely to be with regards to time to process an ever-increasing number of applications. So how will you find the time to review and respond to hundreds of applications that you're very likely to receive for any vacancy that you have? Do you have the right technology in place in relation to recruitment software and tracking system? And do you have the right support in place, whether that be, internal administrative support or external support if needed? I mean, at JVP, we've helped hundreds of employers significantly reduce the time they spend on recruitment through support and technology. So I'm just going to share an example of where we work with Tricol Sue. And I'm absolutely delighted that the zoos have been able to get the doors back open over the last few weeks, certainly in England. Obviously, many of them are charities, and they really have been struggling, like obviously many other organisations. So delighted that they're back open. And at JVP, we work as an extension of the HR team at Twycross Zoo, handling all of their time-consuming work within the recruitment process. And from writing their adverts and promoting them onto job sites and social media, sifting their applications and conducting telephone interviews, and then arranging and confirming all of their interviews and dealing with the outcomes. So for Twycross, they remain in full control of the applicant data with access to the ATS, whilst avoiding the hassle of the manager of managing and administering the advertising in early stages of the selection process. So they've saved thousands of hours in time over the last year or two with regards to recruitment. If you have access to the right technology already, fantastic, and the right time-saving support, brilliant, because this new recruitment challenge need not be a headache if that's your scenario. But if you haven't got the right technology and support in place, it certainly is worth thinking about what options are out there for you in terms of software or support, because time really will be a big challenge. The next challenge we're going to have a look at is cost. The pandemic has forced most businesses to seek cost savings for all business operations, and for many, this certainly includes the evaluation of talent attraction and recruitment methods too. At JVP, we've been approached and welcomed on board many new clients over the past few weeks, and it certainly shouldn't have been a surprise to us, really, as this quieter period for many has provided a superb opportunity to seek new and more cost-effective ways of working. If your recruitment strategy involves using recruitment agencies or methods that have lots of hidden costs involved, and you use these methods just because you always have, maybe it's time to look at the options out there and potentially use this situation for time for change. You could be promoting your employer brand as part of a direct talent attraction strategy, and this will really help you to attract the very best people and save thousands on the recruitment costs in the process. One thing you will find me talking about in a lot of the webinars and sessions that we run is that we're very passionate about employer brands and the power of them when it comes to attracting great people. If it's a lack of time to manage the recruitment process yourself that concerns you with having your own direct recruitment strategy, then there are solutions to this. One of our clients, for example, Less Common Metals, they'd for many years been using recruitment agencies as their sole method to recruit talent. And they were a little bit hesitant about introducing a direct recruitment strategy due to the time that potentially would be involved in managing their applications. But they needn't have worried, because actually we had the pleasure of welcoming them on board, and we've been supporting with them with their recruitment for the last 18 months, 2 years. And during that time, they've saved over £40,000, as well as attracting really good quality applications by, again, using the power of their employer brands. So if what you've been doing has been working great, fantastic, but now could even still be a time to see, can you do it even better and save, obviously, cost in the process too. The third challenge that I just want to talk about links back to the fact that there are lots more people on the job market, and it could be very tempting for employers to focus solely on just reducing costs, which contradicts a little bit what I was talking about a moment ago. But sometimes the cheapest methods aren't necessarily the best. Like with anything in life, you get what you pay for. And you sometimes using the cheapest methods can limit the exposure of your job adverts, and you may miss out on reaching the very best people on the market. Now, surely the best way forward to overcome business challenges caused by the pandemic is to make sure that you have the best of the best people on board. Again, big believer that people are the biggest asset of any business. There is a big difference in the people that you will attract by choosing either just a cheap post and pray advertising service with no employer branding, or by just using just one job site when there are over 1,100 job sites in the UK used by different job seekers. So choosing the right ones and multiple ones is really important. And if you only post your vacancies on social media, again, fantastic method to attract talent, but you could be still really limiting your audience. So just an example of a business that we work with, Pfeiffer Vacuum. They were running their own independent advertising campaign for a sales vacancy, but it wasn't quite attracting the right quality of candidates. And they found through the comprehensive approach that we take working with them with their own direct recruitment strategy, they significantly increased the quality of applications that were coming through. So whilst we may now be in an employer-driven market, and that might put us in a great position when we next need to recruit to be picky and choosy about who we employ, people that are good at what they do can still be very picky and choosy too. There will still be challenges to find solutions for when you come to recruit. There may just be more time-consuming headaches and need to implement more cost-effective strategies. What I'm going to talk about now is the candidate journey. Because as I said a moment ago, potential employees they can still be very choosy about where they work, regardless of it being an employer-driven market. So whilst employers quite rightly will hope that applicants will make a good first impression on the company, it's really important that for the potential employee to have the very best experience and give them every reason to want to work for the company. That might seem obvious, but I'm just going to go through a few steps here of things that you can look at. So I touched upon this in a webinar a couple of weeks ago, but smart employer branding with job adverts is important to get the attention of the talent that you want to attract. I mean, would you be happy to apply for a job advert that just said our clients? I certainly wouldn't, and I know that many won't, especially the best people, as I say, who care about where they work. They want this information up front so they can make informed decisions from the outset. And the next key point to think about is the way that job adverts are displayed, because many individuals now will use a mobile phone to browse the internet, and certainly when it comes to the job search, using a mobile phone to conduct a search is absolutely the number one choice. So making sure your job adverts are in an easy to read format and concise, thinking about the use of bullet points, the order, the amount of information will make a big difference as to whether they are fully read and considered or whether they're discounted through lost interest. We've had sort of quite a few employers that have been recruiting over the last couple of months with the challenges that have been going on, but they've obviously sought new ways to conduct the recruitment process, and we've been advising on technologies that can help with that. So we've got some employers that have been conducting initial interviews via Zoom or by Teams, which can be great tools and can actually save yourself and potential employees time and money in the early stages of the recruitment process. Also, we've had employers that have traditionally had in-house testing when people have come along to interviews at their offices, and they've suddenly found that these tests that they have set up, they've not been able to use whilst doing remote recruiting. So we've actually been able to support them with our online skills testing service too. It's not necessarily about replacing the often very helpful meet-in-person interview, which can, of course, be insightful for the potential employee to see the working environment and soak up the atmosphere, and, of course, for you to assess many other factors too. But this initial approach of remote recruiting will help you to reduce the shortlist and focus your energy on those that stand out from the crowd, and in turn speed up the recruitment process. On that note, whilst I said earlier, within an employer-driven market, employers can choose to manage the recruitment process at the pace that they wish. But speeding the recruitment process is really important if you don't want to lose great people to competition. Of course, it should not compromise on the effectiveness of the selection process. And I'm a big believer in, don't make a hire in a rush. It's better to wait for the right person than just to take somebody on because it will pay dividends waiting for the right person to come along. But certainly regular communication to keep your potential employees updated on the next step is paramount, because they will be judging what internal communication could be like if they were to become an employee of yours. So remember that great people can still be very choosy about where they work, even if we are in an employer-driven market now. Individuals get one chance to make a great first impression, and so do we as employers. One thing that won't change about the ability to attract great people is how your employer brand is perceived by the way that you look after your existing employees. So effective employee engagement is vital if you want to be an employer of choice and remain that way. So on that note, I'm going to hand you over to employee engagement specialist Andy from Weekly 10, and I'll be back a little later to answer any questions that you may have. Thanks for listening.
Great, thanks, Kath. Fantastic. So, quick intro before we jump into talking a little bit more about engagement. I'm Andy Roberts. So I'm CEO and one of the founders at Weekly 10. We're an employee engagement platform which is really focused around improving communication in organisations, particularly between employees and managers. And we've successfully replaced traditional processes within a number of organisations globally with our process. So today I'm just going to take you through, off the back of what Kath was saying around actually, once you've attracted your staff to your organization, how do you actually engage them, and what does that look like in the current world that we look at the moment. So the first thing I think is good to baseline what an engaged employee looks like within an organization. And for us, we always focus around 5 key areas. The first 2 are very much around how people feel within an organization, feeling valued, feeling satisfied. And then the other 3 are around how people behave and how they behave positively within an organization. Do they demonstrate the fact they will go the extra mile? Do they demonstrate pride in the organization? And are they advocates both internally and externally for that organization? These 5 areas are really key for us when we work with our clients, and these are the 5 areas to us that demonstrate an engaged employee within an organization. And why is that important? Well, we've probably all seen these statistics before, but it's worth reiterating that actually employee engagement has a very real connection to productivity, to staff retention, to reductions in absence and sickness, and also significantly here, 44% increase in innovation within organizations. So employee engagement is a key strategic, and has become more so over the last few years, a key strategic pillar of an ambitious and progressive organization. So how do we do this at the moment? So just to kind of baseline the traditional approach to employee engagement within organizations. I think the first one, as we'll all kind of know, is the employee survey. And whether this is a yearly survey or whether it's become a pulse survey, however you do it, typically surveys are pretty much one way. They're often about asking employees, typically anonymously, about how they find the work environment, how they find working in the organization, asking an NPS type question as to whether they'd recommend the organization. And this is all great, and it does provide a snapshot in time. But over time, unless employees see feedback from that, actually the effectiveness of those surveys to give valid information becomes more difficult. Secondly, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, anonymous surveys do not build a culture of openness within organizations either. So it's very easy for employees to maybe talk about some of the negatives without actually coming to the table and being accountable for maybe making those changes. So there are significant challenges with employee surveys. And the other thing to bear in mind is that employee surveys alone are not employee engagement. They are purely measuring the point in time that you are at, and it's really important that actually, if you're doing surveys, that there is actually a way to introduce intentions and actually action some of the items that come out of that. The second one would be the dreaded performance review, and when I say dreaded, I mean dreaded typically for employees and managers. And we'll probably all know that often one of the key performance measures for a HR professional within an organization will be the completion rate of performance reviews. But the completion rate of performance reviews says nothing about their effectiveness within an organization. All it says is that people have ticked a box. So there are significant challenges, especially with performance reviews, which are over a long period of time, so a 12-month or a 6-month review. because as you'll see on the left-hand side, there are a number of significant areas where they lack accuracy and efficiency. So first of all, they often relate to outdated goals that people have set. I can hazard a guess that many people will have objectives set at the beginning of this year that are now completely torn apart, but are still sitting in their objectives for the year within a system or within a document somewhere. And they'll come to the end of the year and actually they'll just write them all off. And actually, there's a good excuse because it's COVID. However, there's no reason why those shouldn't have been iterated during this period and modified accordingly. But the biggest issue with performance reviews is outdated feedback, and the fact that if you're providing feedback for an event which is 6 months ago, 4 months ago, 3 months ago, or even a month ago, it is far less effective than providing timely feedback. So feedback is a big issue with performance reviews, and because of that, typically the feedback that you're providing can actually be more difficult from a manager's perspective. So it's not just an uncomfortable conversation for employees, but often managers struggle to have these important conversations because they're not used to providing that feedback, and they just have to do it maybe once a year within the framework itself. So with those kind of traditional processes that we have in place that you might think of as kind of strategic HR processes, what should we actually do from an employee engagement perspective? And we'll all have seen these images, slides in the office, jukebox, pinball machines, table tennis tables, as being a way of showing that employees are engaged within organizations. And whilst all of these things are great, they actually have very little to do with the core of employee engagement. Certainly having a great work environment is fantastic for employees, and having great benefits, whether that be a great pension, whether it be access to benefits and discounts on cars or gym membership, etc. All of these lifestyle benefits are great, but they're actually a very small part of actually what employee engagement is. And I think we have to go back and actually look at what people are saying in terms of how you influence employee engagement. Now, we've talked about kind of what an engaged employee looks like. This extract, actually, it's from 2009, so it's some time ago, and this is actually hidden within a CIPD fact sheet. And it's actually quite a good overview of how you can influence employee engagement within an organization. You'll actually notice that there's no real mention here of employee environment, of benefits, of anything else. What we're actually talking about here is leadership, line managers, employees having a voice, and then also a demonstration of organizational integrity across the entire organization. So if you just go back to these 4 things, you have a great way of actually understanding what you can do to be able to influence employee engagement within your organization. That said, I would say that there are a number of initiatives, again, some of which have been in place for a long while, etc., which do address these. So I think if you have a look at this image here, you'll see that we've taken leadership, line manager, employee voice, and organizational integrity, and map those through to some of those traditional processes that we talked about. So we have the coaching, training, and leadership elements, which are core to a lot of, especially corporate organizations, in terms of moving leaders through an organization, succession planning, ensuring that managers have the tools and the capabilities to support their staff. The other being employee voice, the fact that you can run a survey and obviously understand your employees. And then finally, often the values plastered all over the wall that most people ignore within the office to demonstrate organizational integrity and the behaviors that people are expected to have. And across all of that, you would expect performance management to kind of do its job as well, to tie those things together, to tie together the training and leadership training that you've had and the coaching, to tie together actions around employee surveys, certainly from a management perspective, and then also how people demonstrate behaviors and values within the organization. However, we've seen that performance reviews and employee surveys have some significant issues. And we've also said that values, unless you do something with them, are not really going to make an impact. And then also, whilst coaching, training, and leadership programs are fantastic and they do create better leaders and better managers, there's often very little way of embedding those learnings into the day-to-day of an organization. So people can go on a training course, but actually, how do they take that and put that into practice without getting caught up in the business as usual, the day-to-day stuff as well within what they do? So I think we need to have a look going forward at a different way of approaching these 4 areas. And whilst these may seem woolly, if you dig down into what these mean, you can actually come up with a strategy for your organization, organizations are unique in terms of their culture and the way in which they should develop in these areas. But there's some key areas here that actually stretch across all 4 of these, rather than just meeting one of these individual targets. The first one is empowerment and involvement. So actually, yes, you put a manager or a leader can go on to a training course, or an employee can be empowered with some additional be given some additional skills by some training. But how do you actually get them to utilize those and be empowered within an organization and be involved within an organization? And this is very, very much key to implementing employee engagement initiatives. The second is a performance culture, and how actually, rather than just setting objectives within a performance review, how are people accountable for those objectives through the year, and also accountable for changing direction where needed? And this is becoming increasingly important in the fact that organizations need to be more agile. And Kath talked about agility. Agility is really important, and it'll often be mentioned in company values. But that means that the way in which you set goals and objectives needs to be agile as well, and you need to give people the tools to be able to do that. And then finally, which underlines a lot of this, and we've already kind of touched on this, is a feedback culture, and a culture where people feel they can stand behind what they say and be open and transparent, and that managers are empowered and involved to provide feedback as well. So going back to surveys, typically employee surveys will be anonymous, and they will bypass managers and go straight to HR and senior leadership. Actually, if you can build a framework whereby managers are involved in that process, in making small changes, because every team culture is slightly different, and being empowered to actually raise some of those issues themselves, rather than everything go directly through to senior management and HR, actually you can then lead to the empowerment involvement of those people in the organization, and you can also really give them some accountability and responsibility around the performance aspects of their role. So really, the way we always talk about this is a move from more transactional processes to actually things which embed a culture. And yes, it takes time to embed a culture, and there's a journey. And often we'll work with our clients, and when our clients come on board on the Weekly 10 platform, for example, we will be starting with some level of employee survey and their current performance management review. But then actually what we do is we plan that out with them, and we say, right, okay, yes, your surveys are currently anonymous. How do you break that down over time, and how do you slowly change the culture in your organization to actually be meeting these three cultural tenets and processes below? So I'm going to take feedback, because for us, feedback is the core. And if you can develop that feedback culture, then actually those other 2 things above will follow in terms of providing that. Now, the reason why feedback is so fundamental is actually summed up quite nicely in these statistics here. And this was a survey actually done back in 2016 by Gallup, which showed that 87% of employees want feedback to develop. No major surprise there. Nearly 80% feel they don't get enough feedback at work. Again, not much of a surprise. And 42% of millennials expect feedback at least once per week. And we're seeing with Gen Z, that's even more so. And again, that's no surprise. If people are able to message quickly on their phone, they're able to post things online, etc., why should they wait a whole year to have a meaningful conversation with their manager in the way that they do that? But one of the most telling statistics here is that 96% of managers agree that the more frequent they give feedback, the easier it becomes. Okay, so that's nearly 100% of managers saying that if I had a framework to provide feedback more often, I'd actually be better at it, and I'd actually find it easier, and it would be less of a stress for me. And actually, if you could give that feedback more often, then they would be empowered to make changes. And actually, we all know that normalizing something is the key to actually it becoming a habit within an organization. So just to reiterate, in terms of, you know, some powerful kind of side effects really from that actually feedback, if you think about it, does make employees more effective and more focused, because you have that. If somebody's going slightly off track, they can then come back in track. They have access to where the organization is heading and how they are influencing the organization. Employees feel more valued and satisfied because ultimately, you know, most employees, the majority of their relationship in an organization is with their peers, within their team, and with their manager. So it's really, really key that actually the manager is really supporting them, and if they can provide that ongoing feedback, then clearly that is support. We then have the fact that if you can encourage feedback and ongoing feedback, you're able to develop more transparency and openness within an organization. And then finally, of course, feedback is proven to impact employee retention. Most employees, when they're surveyed, when they leave an organization, they will cite their manager as being one of the key reasons why they've left. Most people will find it difficult to leave a manager who is really supportive, provides them with the right level of employee exposure within the organization, and it's really about a big impact onto the employee retention side of things. And then another thing here, in terms of the data, employee attrition is heavily linked, and this should probably say linked to a lack of feedback. But there actually a study that we've recently carried out with Bangor University and Smart Cymru, which is a European-backed research initiative. And what we were able to do as part of that program was actually take data from Weekly 10, and we showed that lack of feedback between an employee and a manager was a key indicator to people leaving an organization. And in fact, based on that, we've developed a model, again with Bangor, and built it into the platform, which actually predicts the risk of attrition within certain parts of an organization up to 70% accuracy 6 months before people leave the organization. And that is purely based on the feedback that is provided within Weekly 10. So actually, our managers being supportive, are managers sharing success stories from their team? Are they recognizing people within their team? And how are they providing that feedback? And obviously, are they providing any feedback at all? So it's really strongly linked to retention of staff within organizations. And just to touch on a few aspects that we often talk to clients about, and when we're coaching clients to use the system and to also to provide feedback, there's a really nice acronym just called FAST, which allows managers to really think about how they're providing feedback. And it is really about providing frequent, appropriate, specific and timely feedback, and building that in. The key thing here is that you can build this into a process that you have within your organization. A lot of organizations will say, yes, our managers do one-to-ones every month or every 2 weeks, but are they actually doing those one-to-ones? Are they being pushed back? And you need that visibility, and managers do need to take accountability for providing feedback. So it is really important that you have the right processes in place, which are lightweight, but are able to support managers to do that. And then secondly, you've got a tool of how to provide feedback, but then how do you make that habitual? Because we know habits essentially define the culture of an organization. So actually, if people can get into the habit of providing feedback, then they'll carry on doing it. And the process will just become part of the culture of the organization. Whereas often you'll have a process and that does not match with what's happening within the organization itself. So the key to providing habitual feedback is short cycles. We always recommend weekly. You might have guessed from the name, but weekly is proven. If you can get people to do something weekly, it's the best way of building a habit. Whether it's a Friday, a Monday, a Wednesday, it doesn't really matter. But if you can focus people around a certain point of the week to provide feedback, then actually you've got a much better chance of that being embedded within the organization. And we've seen this with organizations we've worked with. If you embed a shorter cycle, you're able to adopt that much more easily in the organization and have a longer term success, a chance of success with rolling that process out. You can go longer than that, but certainly if you go beyond monthly, things become more ad hoc in the way in which they work. You need a simple process. So it's no good having a complex process to provide feedback. It needs to be something that everybody knows about within the organization, and it, becomes just part of the way you work. And then finally, it's transparency and alignment. So again, one thing we often work with our clients on is aligning to organizational objectives and goals. And we support the ability to set goals, or OKRs, so objectives and key results, within the feedback cycle, because actually it's really important from an employee engagement perspective for employees to know the work they're doing, how it impacts the overall organization. And if you can build that into your feedback cycle, you're really then focusing on that performance culture as well, and making sure that you've got a continuous cycle to make sure that people are effective in their job as well as engaged. One thing I do just want to touch on in terms of feedback is actually probably an overused term, so apologies for using it here, but the new normal in terms of what that looks like, because again, we'll talk to a lot of clients in the past, and they'll often say, well, we're great with feedback because we're all in the same office, we can walk around and chat to people, and actually those informal conversations, those serendipitous conversations, are really great, and they work really well. That's not the whole story, but actually moving forward, there are more challenges, because I'll just bring up an interesting survey from LinkedIn that was actually run in June. Now, that there's lots of Ipsos Mori and lots of people have come out with lots of surveys, but I've chosen not to actually look at that. I've chosen to look at an organic survey which was launched on LinkedIn this month and had nearly 75,000 responders, 73,000 respondents. And this actually matches a lot of the other surveys that are coming out. But this showed that when asked, most employees after this period of lockdown and COVID-19 are expecting to be able to work from home and the office. Okay, only 7% want to go back to the office full time. 36 want to stay working from home, but 57% want the flexibility to be able to work both from home and from the office itself. So that gives you an idea. Now every business is different in terms of whether you can support a level of home working or remote working, but what this shows is expectation from employees. So whilst you might expect all your employees maybe to return to the office, if you think back about how people feel valued within an organization and taking into consideration people's feedback, then actually there is going to be a need to support this ability to work remotely. Now, this is, if everybody was working from home, then that would be one challenge, and you could solve that in a certain way. But when people are actually in a hybrid deployment in this perspective, you end up with quite a lot of what we'd say asynchronicity. So you have people in the office and out of the office at different times, which actually leads to a number of challenges around feedback that you have to look at addressing. So asynchronous working, yes, it means that people could arrange to have meetings in the office at a certain period of time, etc. What it does mean is you do lose a little bit of that serendipitous conversation, going for a coffee, talking over the computer screen, however you're doing that, with the asynchronous working. So you have that increased flexibility of people being in and out of the office. It's also more difficult to gain that direct feedback from those conversations because you have less face time. And one thing we often talk to our clients about is you're less able to read the room. So again, one thing we do work with clients on is sentiment analysis through the way in which people are providing feedback. And actually, not being able to read the room anymore does lead to some challenges around how you're able to understand the general sentiment of the organization, but with the new work, with the new way of working. So just as a very quick summary, really, in terms of increasing and enabling feedback and how you can do that within your organization. So consider breaking down performance management. I think that is really key. We're talking about, if you're looking at a traditional process, you're actually looking at something which is 20, 25, 30 years old in terms of its process. So you really need to look at that process, maybe do away with the annual review, maybe move to more of a continuous review. There are ways of doing both, and a lot of our clients will do continuous feedback, which automatically feeds into an overall review at the end of the year, and that can be really powerful because actually you're giving people information about their year rather than them having to remember it or what have you. But what we would say is definitely go towards short cycle if you can in terms of that feedback. Look at your engagement surveys. If you're doing something like Best Companies every year, then I would say that that's a great thing to do because it's a benchmark against other organizations. But typically, most organizations will use that process as more of a marketing piece than actually anything to do with employee engagement. So whilst you'll get some engagement information from that, actually you're going to be much better if you can bring some of that feedback into your short cycle feedback and involve managers rather than bypassing them to a corporate survey. Encourage transparent feedback. So encourage people to put their name behind things and own things and provide constructive criticism or provide constructive ideas of how to change things. Because as we all know, if people own things, they're much more likely to be highly engaged with them as well. It's also important to provide a framework because if you just put a manager on a course of how to provide feedback or say, use FAST, use this framework to provide feedback, you also need to provide managers with an expectation of how often they need to provide feedback. Most managers are not career managers. Most of them are there because they've got promotion to a certain level in the organization and they don't necessarily have the skill set to provide that feedback and also be proactive enough to be able to make sure that they're providing that feedback on an ongoing basis. So it's really important to look at some form of framework and expectation that managers should provide feedback. It's also, and whilst you don't want to overdo things in terms of process, it is important that managers are accountable for that. So having some way of tracking that, whether that be through a software like something like Weekly 10 or what have you, or just making sure that people are tracking it, it is really important that actually you understand that your managers are doing that. And then finally, make your organizational targets more visible and accessible. So can you publish your objectives of your organization and make sure that they are quite specific? So, your revenue targets, your cost saving ambitions, etc., making sure they are visible to the organization so people understand how they can influence those. Ideally, I think individuals then have continuous goals, or teams would have goals or OKRs that they can track. But ultimately, at least if you can give some visibility to the direction of the organization, that's going to be really key. And I just want to touch on finally on some of the options that you can do to facilitate this, especially in a remote environment. Microsoft Teams has obviously garnered a lot of interest recently. Likewise, Slack is an alternative to Teams if you're not using Microsoft for everything else. It can also be a good option. And then obviously tools like Weekly 10, which often will build into these platforms. So for example, we have integrations with Teams and Slack, which allow you to facilitate that feedback process. But what I would say is it's really important to have some form of process and tool in there that is enabling you to do that, whether it is Teams, Slack, Weekly 10, or something else, even a spreadsheet at worst, just to make sure that process is being adhered to and actually building your culture that you want in your organization. Fantastic. So that just covers over the areas in terms of engagement and very much feedback that I wanted to cover. We're always happy to talk about this, as you can tell. So always feel free to reach out to me directly, or our details are here on the screen as well. But you can always contact me at andy@weekly10.com if you want to have a chat over any of these things or some of the processes that we talked about today. Thanks, Kath.
Thank you, Andy. That's really, really insightful, and certainly I love the FAST acronym there, and hopefully everybody else is too. I'm certainly going to be adopting that one. We're talking, if people would like to pop any questions into the chat, and we can start to answer those as we go. Just while waiting for some to come through. Andy, we were talking obviously just before we started this webinar today around employee engagement given these uncertain times, and obviously individuals out there worrying about job security. How far would you suggest as businesses we go in terms of engaging our employees with where our business is at, and full transparency about the future? What would your advice be beyond that? I imagine that's quite critical, really, to also keep people.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this is something that's obviously going to be a challenge over the next few months, in the fact that furlough is typically ending for most employees, and businesses will now have to make the tough decision, if they've not made it already, to look at redundancies, etc. And we know that they have a massive impact on employee engagement for the people that remain within the organization as well. Transparency is it is key here. It is very, very difficult to be fully transparent with certain things. Obviously there are legal aspects to it, there are various other things, but if you can just level set where things are as much as possible and talk about those challenges that you have maybe in the marketplace, etc., again, it will make people think. It actually give them and empower them to think about ways in which they can help as well, right? So I don't think companies should be afraid to say, it is a challenge, we're here, okay? But at the same time, there needs to be some optimism for where the organization should go. Not that you're just ramping things down, because obviously that will impact employee engagement. So I think it is important to involve employees in that, give them transparency, but then also give them the strategy for where you're heading, so that they can focus around that and have something to really aim for.
Absolutely, fantastic advice. We've got a question coming in from Chris here. Traditionally, all of the surveys have been anonymous, and I don't know how our teams would react to having to now own their feedback, though I definitely see benefits. How would you get around this issue typically?
Yeah, it's for us, actually, that's a common occurrence. Is that what we'll talk? So at Weekly 10, we start from a transparent perspective. So we're very passionate about people providing transparent feedback. The manager knows who's provided that feedback. People can stand behind it. But it is a cultural change. So typically, when we work with clients, they actually start with 100% anonymous and then slowly move to being more transparent. And there is, whether you're using Weekly 10 or you're just using SurveyMonkey or whatever you're doing, the way of doing that is starting from where you are at the moment and then slowly bringing in questions which are very clear that they are transparent rather than anonymous, and just building that in slowly over time. The key thing there is the transparent questions typically go to the manager. So it's actually about feedback and involving the manager. So if you can make those questions transparent over time, you may not get to 100% transparency, and for some questions, ENPS is a good example, employee net promoter score. It wouldn't make sense for that to be anything other than anonymous. However, you can slowly feed in those questions and start to build that culture and actually see how people are reacting to that. It's an iterative process. So are you getting good feedback from that transparent feedback? What do managers feel about it? That there's not a set plan that you can just hit. You need to iterate over time.
Fantastic.
Is what I'd recommend. Yeah.
Great. Question just coming in with regards to how important it is to put salaries on job adverts. And my advice would be, from many years of experience of seeing the difference of adverts that have salaries on and not, is to, where you can, definitely put a salary guide onto an advertisement. You'll typically find that you'll get an increase of about 40% better quality of applications by doing so. I appreciate there can sometimes be in challenges internally in advertising salaries externally, but I would say, where possible, have a look internally at what you can do to be more transparent with the structure of your salaries, to enable you, when you are going external, to actually be able to advertise them. Because again, great people can be picky and choosy about where they work, which is important for your employer brand, but they also may have got to a certain level in their career and they don't want to go backwards in terms of the financial reward, or it might be one of the main motivating factors for them still. They might feel that they may have been underpaid where they are. So without knowing kind of what the guide is for the opportunity you're offering, it may hold them back from applying. So definitely recommend putting salary guides onto an advert where you can. But of course, not just the salary, the whole benefits package and other reasons why they may want to work for your company. So showcase your employer brand and all the wonderful reasons as to what makes you a great place to work. We've got a question coming in from Oliver. Could you talk more about the platform that predicts attrition? Does it track other reasons for leaving against feedback? So you get to the root cause, or does it only focus on feedback?
Yeah, so you'll note the 5 things we talked about earlier in the slide deck. So discretionary effort, pride, advocacy, etc. And actually, the model that we developed uses those 5 areas. So actually, the brand name for it is something called 10 Pulse. So what it actually does is it takes those 5 key areas, and those 5 key areas are typically taken from the data that we have. We use machine learning to do that. So what we do is we track those changes against a model that's been developed, a psychological model that's been developed, and we essentially provide engagement levels against those 5 areas. And using those 5 areas, which are very much focused around feedback, we're able to map those 5 areas to the attrition risk that we talked about. So actually, when we talk about that 70% accuracy around attrition risk in a certain part of the organization, that's based on those 5 areas of engagement that we talked about, which fundamentally are linked back to the way in which feedback is provided. So yes, you will have an indicator on those as to whether actually it's to do with the fact that people aren't willing to go the extra mile, or there's certain aspects. Now, what we typically say, and this is the way most of our clients would use this data, is if you do find an area of the business has that risk, sometimes you'll maybe understand that because maybe there's been redundancies made in that space, etc. But sometimes you won't. So what the important thing then to do is, if the data is not telling you everything, is then to jump in and we actually recommend questions that will help uncover some of that information. So you can do a little bit additional information to understand how that typically works. Obviously, it's not a 100% accuracy. It's 70%, but it gives you a really good idea of how feedback links through to that risk of people leaving the organisation.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Andy. Hopefully that helps, Oliver. Hannah is asking, are we finding more employers are advertising home working roles? Well, it links, and obviously what Andy was talking about there, actually your statistics, that was quite interesting, because we are in where it is possible. Obviously, we've worked with employers across a wide range of industries and lots of different types of roles, from engineering to office-based roles, manufacturing, and everything in between. So obviously it's not always possible for employers to offer home working roles, but we are noticing those that are more office-based positions. We are finding actually the roles that have been starting to trickle through now over the last couple of weeks, that employers are definitely being more receptive to what you described actually, Andy, there, in terms of part home working and part coming into the office. I think for some it's been certainly a challenge to sort of want to jump straight into having home working roles because of what you described there, really, in terms of the benefits of actually being in the office and having people there and actually have the body language and everything else. But yes, we're definitely seeing an increase in the number of either home working or part home working opportunities. And actually, one thing I'd say with that is, I mean, we're based in North Wales, but our employers are all over the UK. But if you're in a location where potentially in the past you've had some challenges attracting people with niche skills or niche experience, if you can actually extend to offering home working opportunities for those roles, it's really going to broaden the talent pool, because all of a sudden these people will be based anywhere in the UK, or potentially you may consider outside of the UK too. So that also might help with some of your especially your more tricky positions to fill. There was certain niche roles or senior level roles where it's possible. So I definitely encourage employers that can look at that option to do so. And yes, we are seeing an increase in them coming through. Thank you, Hannah. Anyone else have any questions before we wrap up today? Anything else you wanted to add, Andy?
No, I
think
I'm good. I think I think there's some, if anybody has any questions subsequent to the call, feel free to fire them over. We're always happy to talk about feedback and discuss it, of course. So fantastic.
This webinar has been recorded, and we will be sending an email out later with a copy of a link to the videos in case you've missed any of it. Please do go and enjoy the lovely sunshine if you can do, and get out of the office today. But thank you all for joining us. And as Andy said, our contact details will come round in due course too. So if you've got any further questions you want to contact us about directly, we certainly welcome that. So thank you all for joining us. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.